He faked his death 30 years ago, then threatened to ruin my credit if I didn't obey. At the police station, I uncovered it all. I never thought I'd walk into a police station holding my father's watch in one hand and trembling so hard that I nearly dropped it, but that's exactly where I was at 7:43 p.m. last Thursday. My godfather Paul, a man I once trusted more than anyone, was sitting across from me, staring with eyes that had turned cold and calculating. He had just threatened to ruin my credit score if I didn't comply. Comply with what? With his demands for money, silence, and loyalty. That was the moment everything broke. How did it get this far? A 70-year-old man, practically family, blackmailing me over finances while the smell of diesel fumes drifted in from the police station parking lot, making me nauseous. It started small, years ago, and I ignored the red flags. But the truth, the one that had been buried for 30 years, was about to destroy not only my trust in him, but everything I thought I knew about my family. I grew up believing Paul was a safe one. He was the godfather who always brought me spicy curry when Mom was too tired to cook after her $3,200 a month receptionist job. He'd smile, clap me on the back, and say, "Don't let the world make you small, kid." At 12, I looked up to him. At 19, I realized those words were a mask. Paul was my mother's oldest friend. Susan, my mom, trusted him with everything. She always said, "Paul helped us when your father passed." My father died before I turned 2, so I never really knew him, only the watch I carried. Silver band, scratched face, always ticking like a reminder of what was missing. Paul filled that void. Too well. The first red flag happened during dinner one September evening. I remember it exactly, September 14th, 2022, 6:15 p.m. We were eating curry Paul had brought. My tongue burned from the spice, my eyes watering, but I laughed it off. Then he leaned in, his voice low. "You'll need to be smart with money, Luke. You don't want to end up like your mom, scraping by on scraps. Do you even know what a credit score is?" I shrugged. I was 19. I had just started my first job at a hardware store, making barely enough for rent and textbooks. He tapped the table. "Credit, it controls your life. I can either build yours or bury it." I thought he was joking. Mom laughed nervously. "Paul, stop scaring him." But as I stayed locked on mine, I should have noticed how serious he was. At first, Paul's presence felt helpful. He offered to co-sign my first apartment lease, just to get you started. I was grateful. My mom had no savings to help me, so Paul stepping in felt like a blessing. He told me to sign a couple papers without really explaining. I didn't read them. I was too eager, too trusting. That was mistake number 1. Because a few months later, bills started showing up in my name, credit cards I never opened, charges I never made. Paul brushed it off. "Oh, that's just paperwork getting crossed. I'll handle it." And he did by paying them off mysteriously. But then came the hook. "I covered you, Luke. You owe me now." I remember lying awake that night, the glow of my phone screen casting shadows across my room. My chest felt tight, my hands sweaty. My first panic attack. I told myself it was nothing, that he was just being protective. But my body knew better. A week later, Mom pulled me aside after therapy. She had been going for her own anxiety for years and whispered, "You need to be careful with Paul. He's done things in the past." Her voice trailed off. "What things?" I pressed. She shook her head, biting her lip. "It's not my story to tell, but it was my story. I just didn't know it yet." The real break came when my best friend, Ethan, started acting weird. We were hanging out in my apartment one night, watching Netflix, when I saw his phone light up. My name. My voice. He was recording me. "Dude, what the hell?" I snapped. He stammered, "It's nothing, man. Paul just wants to know how you're doing." I froze. My best friend was spying on me. For Paul? That was when I started piecing it together. The strange financial threats, Mom's hesitation, Ethan's betrayal, and the whispers I'd overheard in town, the ones about Paul not being who he said he was. But I didn't know the truth yet. The truth that Paul had faked his own decades earlier to cover up criminal activity, that he wasn't just a manipulator, but someone who'd built his entire life on lies. And I was the next pawn in his game. The first real red flag had already passed. The storm was only beginning. Suspicion doesn't hit like a lightning strike, it seeps in, drip by drip, until suddenly the floor under your feet is ruined. That's what it felt like with Paul. After the night I caught Ethan recording me, everything around me seemed infected with doubt. I replayed our conversations in my head. The jokes Ethan made about money, about being careful what you say. At first, I thought I was paranoid. But therapy had taught me pay attention to patterns. And the pattern was clear. Paul was tightening a net around me. 2 weeks later, I sat across from my therapist, Dr. Ramos. My legs bounced uncontrollably. "I can't trust anyone anymore," I admitted. "Even my best friend, he was literally recording me for Paul. Why would he do that?" Dr. Ramos adjusted her glasses. "Because Paul is manipulative. People like him build webs. They convince others that betraying you is helping. It isn't about you, it's about control." I swallowed hard. My depression medication had stopped working entirely at this point. Nights were restless. I'd wake from nightmares, Paul standing over me with the same cold stare, heart racing, drenched in sweat. Panic attacks became my alarm clock. Meanwhile, Paul's grip on my finances grew. I logged into my bank account one morning and saw a new credit line, $7,500 attached to my name. My stomach dropped. I called the number on the statement. "Sir, you authorized this account last month." "No, I didn't," I snapped, voice cracking. "Yes, you did," the rep insisted. "We have your signature." It was my handwriting, but not. My chest burned. Forgery. Paul had actually forged my name. When I confronted him, he didn't even flinch. "You're overreacting, Luke," he said, sipping coffee like nothing was wrong. This is how people get ahead. You'll thank me when you're older. Older? I hissed. You're ruining me right now. His eyes narrowed. Don't raise your voice at me. Remember, I can bury your credit score with one phone call. The words hit like a slap. I was 19, broke, and he held the keys to my future. Mom wasn't helping. In fact, she enabled him. Paul means well, she said one evening while washing dishes. The smell of spicy curry still lingered in the air from dinner. He's just intense. Intent, Mom. He's forging my name on credit cards. She looked away, her hands trembling. He helped us when your father died. We owe him. Owe him? The phrase twisted in my gut. I realized she wasn't just defending him, she was bound to him. Decade of debt, favors, secrets. The paranoia worsened. Every time I walked through town, I felt eyes on me. At the hardware store where I worked, whispers followed me. That's Luke Paul's kid, heard he's in trouble with money. Colleagues avoided me. HR called me in to ask if I was under financial strain because someone had called anonymously, claiming I was stealing supplies. I knew it was Paul. Who else would sabotage me like that? The breaking point came on December 2nd, 2022 at 8:30 p.m. I was at home. The watch Dad left me ticking quietly on the desk. Ethan showed up and announced, pale and shaking. I need to tell you something, he muttered. My stomach clenched. What now? He pulled out his phone, scrolling. Audio files. Hours of my private conversations labelled with dates. He told me if I didn't give him this, he'd ruin my dad's business. He said he had dirt on everyone. Everyone? I echoed. Ethan nodded. Lucas, not just you. Paul's been doing this for decades. People in town, your mom, even me. My throat went dry. That word again. Decades. After therapy 1 week later, I confronted Mom. Tell me the truth, I demanded. My hand shook so hard the watch nearly slipped off my wrist. What did Paul do before I was born? Her face went pale. She sank into a chair. There's a reason he has so much power, she whispered. Luke, he wasn't supposed to be alive. He faked his 30 years ago. The room tilted. What? He was in deep with people, money laundering, fraud. He staged an accident, disappeared, and came back under a new identity. Everyone thought he was gone, but he wasn't. He's been manipulating us ever since. My pulse hammered in my ears. The nightmares weren't just my imagination, they were echoes of a real monster living in my house all along. By then, strangers on social media were already sending me threatening messages. Screenshots of my supposed states. Posts about how I was a scammer like my Godfather. People I didn't even know spat venom at me online. Paul had turned the whole world against me. And worse, he had Mom still defending him. But the fear was boiling into rage. And the rage was leading me to one inevitable conclusion. I had to confront him, no matter the cost. When you realize your entire childhood was built on a lie, it doesn't just hurt, it shatters your sense of reality. After Mom admitted Paul had faked his 30 years ago, I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened like a vice, and the room felt like it was shrinking. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I demanded, voice cracking. Tears slid down Mom's face. Because if I did, he'd destroy us. He told me he'd make your life miserable. He's done it to others. Others. That word haunted me. Who else had he destroyed? I started digging. Old newspapers, online archives, whispers from older neighbours. It was all there if you knew where to look. A car accident in 1992, Paul died in a fiery crash on Route 68. But the body? Never recovered. People mourned. Funerals were held. And then silence. Until he reappeared under a new name in 1994, suddenly helping my mother, suddenly stepping into my life like a saviour. The more I uncovered, the sicker I felt. This wasn't just about money. It was about power, control, and secrets buried deeper than I could imagine. Secondary betrayals came crashing in like dominoes. First was Ethan, my best friend. I thought after his confession we could rebuild, but one night, while scrolling through messages, I saw his name pop up in a leaked group chat. Screenshots showed him mocking me with Paul's other allies. Kid's losing it. Therapy isn't working for him. Soon he'll cave. My stomach twisted. Ethan hadn't just recorded me, he was laughing at me, with Paul. I smashed my phone against the wall that night. The watch on my wrist ticked louder, steady, mocking my unravelling sanity. Then came the enabler, Aunt Linda, Mom's sister. I always wondered why she defended Paul so fiercely. When I confronted her, she shrugged. Luke, you don't understand. His family, he's done a lot of bad things. Sure, but he's kept us afloat. When your dad died, it was Paul who paid the bills. Bills with what money? I shot back. She looked away. That was all the confirmation I needed. Dirty money. Fraud. Laundering. He'd used us as a front. Psychologically, I was unravelling. My depression meds had stopped working weeks ago, leaving me raw and exposed. Every night brought nightmares. Paul's face twisted, his voice whispering, I can bear you a credit. I'd wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, clutching my father's watch like it was the only anger I had left. Panic attacks struck at random while walking through the hardware store aisles, while standing in line at the grocery store, even while showering. I felt like I was constantly being watched. Therapy became a lifeline, but even there, Paul's shadow loomed. Rewired your thinking, Dr. Ramos told me. You see danger everywhere because you were trained to. That's trauma. She was right. I jumped at diesel fumes outside, certain someone was waiting in a car to follow me. Loud whispers in public felt like daggers. I was drowning in paranoia, and yet every piece of evidence confirmed it wasn't just in my head. The community turned cold. At church, whispers followed me down the pews. At work, colleagues avoided me, HR watching closely. Online, strangers threatened me, pay your debts or else. One DM read, scammers like you deserve to disappear like your godfather should have. The shame was suffocating. I stopped going out at night. I avoided friends. Even grocery shopping felt like a public trial. People judged me for crimes I didn't commit, but Paul's reputation smeared onto me like oil you can't wash off. The final straw came during dinner at Mom's house. The smell of curry spicy, overwhelming filled the kitchen, but I couldn't taste it. I was too angry, too raw. Mom, I said, slamming my fork down. He faked his death. He forged my name. He ruined my credit. Why are you still protecting him? She trembled. Because if I don't, he'll destroy us. He's done worse, Luke. You don't know. Then tell me. She broke then. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Your accident when you were 5, the one where you fell down the stairs, that wasn't an accident. He planned it, to scare me, to keep me dependent. The room went silent except for the ticking of my father's watch. My blood ran cold. My accident. The scar on my forehead I'd lived with all my life, it wasn't random. It was engineered. Paul hadn't just manipulated me. He had marked me. That night, I lay awake, the shadows of betrayal pressing down on me. Best friend, aunt, mother all compromised by Paul. And yet, the truth was crystal clear. If I didn't take him down, he'd keep pulling strings until there was nothing left of me. The rage solidified into resolve. My nightmares weren't warnings anymore, they were blueprints. It was time to confront him directly. Not in whispers. Not in shadows. At his job, in front of everyone. And I was ready to watch his empire burn. The morning I decided to confront Paul, the air itself felt different, sharp, electric, like the entire world was holding its breath. I slipped my father's watch onto my wrist. The land was cold, grounding me. No more hiding, I muttered to myself in the mirror. My reflection looked older than 19, worn down by nightmares and fear. Paul worked as a financial consultant in a glossy office downtown, tucked behind a bank on Ashland Avenue. I knew if I confronted him privately, he'd twist my words, gaslight me, bury me deeper. No, this had to happen publicly. I got there at 10:12 a.m. The building smelled faintly of coffee and toner, but as the elevator rose, all I could smell was diesel, phantom fumes clinging to me like anxiety itself. My chest tightened. For a second, I thought I'd faint. Then the watch ticked against my pulse steady. I forced my feet forward. The office lobby was quiet until I walked in. Heads turned. People whispered. That's Luke, someone muttered. The walls felt like they were closing in, but I pressed on, past the receptionist who looked startled, past cubicles full of people pretending not to stare. I spotted him through the glass wall of his office pole in a navy suit, silver hair neatly combed, laughing with a coworker like nothing in the world was wrong. My rage surged. I slammed the door open. We need to talk now. He turned, that same smile plastered across his face, but his eyes flickered just for a second. Luke, he said smoothly, you can't just barge in here. Oh, I can. I cut him off, my voice shaking. You forged my name on credit cards. You faked your death. You've been blackmailing my entire family for 30 years. The room went dead silent. His co-worker's jaw dropped. Heads poked up over cubicle walls. HR stepped out of an office nearby, eyes wide. Luke, Paul said in that condescending tone I hated. You don't know what you're talking about. Sit down. You're embarrassing yourself. No, I snapped, my voice cracking from equal parts terror and fury. I know exactly what I'm talking about. You staged an accident when I was 5. You planned it. You've been ruining lives, hiding behind paperwork and lies. Gasps rippled through the office. HR approached cautiously. Mr. Haynes, what's going on here? Paul's fake calm shattered. He slammed a folder onto his desk. This is harassment. He's unstable, he's making things up. I pulled out my phone. Am I? My hand shook as I opened files. Ethan had sent me audio recordings of Paul demanding updates about me, threatening Ethan's family. Screenshots of forged signatures. Articles about the 1992 crash. I turned the volume up. Paul's voice filled the office. If Luke doesn't play ball, I'll bury his credit for life. I already own his future. The blood drained from his face. The HR rep's jaw tightened. Colleagues whispered furiously. Someone muttered, is this real? Another whispered, oh my god, he's finished. Paul lunged for my phone, but I yanked it back. No more hiding. Everyone knows now. The office erupted in chaos. HR barked, security. Colleagues stood frozen, watching the Godfather of lies crumble in real time. My heart pounded so violently I thought I might collapse. Paul shouted, spit flying, you think this will stop me? You're nothing without me, Luke, nothing. I stepped closer, the watch glinting under the fluorescent lights. I'd rather be nothing than live as your puppet. Security rushed in, grabbing Paul's arms as he thrashed. His face twisted with rage, veins bulging in his neck. You'll regret this, he screamed. All of you. But for once, people didn't look at me like the problem. They looked at him. As they dragged him out, HR turned to me. We'll need all of that evidence, immediately. I nodded, my whole body trembling. My knees nearly gave out. I'd fantasized about this moment, but living it was different, like ripping a parasite out of my chest. Colleagues whispered louder now. Some looked at me with pity, others with awe. One woman whispered, I knew something was off about him. Another murmured, he's been lying for years. The empire Paul built on secrets collapsed in seconds. And I was the one who struck the match. But victory didn't feel like triumph. As I walked out of the office, the sunlight was blinding, my breathing ragged. Strangers still messaged me online, calling me a liar, a scammer, a fraud. My body still shook with adrenaline. The confrontation had been public, but the damage inside me wasn't undone. I had exposed him. I had burned his mask. But now came the aftermath of lawsuits, the public scrutiny, the whispers that would follow me everywhere. and a part of me that had been revived by years of whispered back, what if he comes for you anyway? Because monsters don't just vanish when the lights come on. Sometimes the shadows linger. The night after the confrontation, I couldn't sleep. My body was vibrating with adrenaline, but my mind was a swamp of fear. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Paul's face twisted in rage as security dragged him away. His words echoed in my skull, "You'll regret this." By 3:08 a.m., I was pacing the living room, my father's watch ticking louder than the silence. The shadows in the corners looked alive. My heart pounded like I was still in that office. This wasn't victory. This was collapse. 2 days later, I broke down completely. At the hardware store, while restocking shelves, I felt the panic rising. My chest tightened, vision tunneled, hands numb. I dropped a box of nails that scattered across the floor. My manager rushed over. "Luke, are you okay?" I couldn't answer. My throat closed up. I bolted outside, collapsing on the pavement, gasping for air. The smell of diesel from a delivery truck slammed into me, sending me spiraling into another attack. Someone called 911. By the time the paramedics arrived, I was shaking uncontrollably, sobbing, begging for it to stop. They told me it was just a panic attack, but it felt like dying. The public backlash made it worse. News of Paul's arrest spread fast. Articles dug up his staged death from the 90s, his fraud, his shady finances. But instead of people seeing me as the victim, I became the scapegoat. "Why didn't you speak up sooner?" Strangers demanded online. "You must have been in on it." One comment read, "You're just as guilty as him." Threatening DMs poured in. "We'll ruin you like you ruined him. Better watch your back." At work, colleagues whispered. One man muttered loud enough for me to hear, "Guess insanity runs in the family." The shame was unbearable. I quit 2 weeks later, unable to face the constant stares. Therapy sessions became lifelines, but even there, I was unraveling. My depression meds aren't working anymore. I told Dr. Ramos, tears blurring my vision. It's like they stopped completely. I can't stop the nightmares. I can't stop hearing his voice. She nodded softly. "That's common when trauma escalates. We may need to adjust your treatment plan, but Luke, he survived. That matters." Did it? Surviving felt like dragging myself through broken glass every day. At home, Mom was spiraling too. She cried during dinner, unable to eat. The curry she used to love sat untouched. "I failed you," she whispered one night, staring at her hands. "I let him control us. I let him hurt you." I wanted to forgive her, but the scar on my forehead throbbed like an open wound. Every time I saw it in the mirror, I remembered her words. That accident wasn't an accident. We barely spoke for weeks. Silence filled the house, heavy and suffocating. The lawsuits began piling in. Credit card companies demanded payments for accounts I never opened. Debt collectors left voicemails. Even though Paul was under investigation, the paperwork was still in my name. One letter read, "Balance due, $18,600. I remember holding that letter, my hands trembling so badly it slipped to the floor. My knees buckled, and I sank beside it sobbing. The walls felt like they were closing in. It wasn't just Paul destroying me, it was the entire system, punishing me for his crimes. By January, I hit rock bottom. I stopped leaving the house. The blinds stayed closed. I ignored calls from friends, what few I had left. Ethan tried reaching out, but I blocked him. Anne Linda sent messages defending Paul, saying he didn't mean to hurt you. I deleted them without replying. I lost track of days. Meals went uneaten. The watch on my wrist was the only thing tethering me to reality, ticking while my life stood still. One night, staring at that watch, I whispered to myself, maybe he was right, maybe I am nothing without him. That was the darkest moment, the thought that maybe I'd never escape his shadow. But something shifted after that night. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was a tiny, stubborn part of me that refused to die. The next morning, I called Dr. Ramos and told her, "I don't want to feel like this forever. Tell me what to do." And that was the first flicker of light after months of suffocating darkness. I wasn't healed. I wasn't strong. But I was willing to fight again. The road back wouldn't be easy, but it was mine. And for the first time, I wanted to walk it. Recovery wasn't a straight line. It was jagged, messy, full of false starts and days where getting out of bed felt like climbing Everest. But slowly, painfully, I began stitching myself back together. It started with small things. Dr. Ramos encouraged me to create a morning routine. "Anchor yourself in the present," she said. So every morning, I made coffee, opened the blinds, and touched my father's watch, reminding myself I'm still here. The nightmares didn't vanish overnight, but I began writing them down instead of burying them. Page after page of Paul's face, his threats, the whispers in town. Dr. Ramos said, when you give fear words, you take away some of its power. It felt ridiculous at first. But eventually, the act of writing turned nightmares into stories I could close in a notebook instead of carrying in my chest. Financially, it was a disaster. The debts Paul forged weren't wiped away instantly. I spent months in and out of legal offices, fighting to prove identity theft. At one point, a collector actually called my workplace to embarrass me. I nearly quit again, but instead I held the phone steady and said, "Take us up with the investigators. I'm not your scapegoat anymore." That moment was small but powerful. I realized I had a voice. Socially, though, I was still radioactive. Strangers online harassed me daily. Even at the grocery store, I felt people's eyes on me. That's him, the kid who exposed Paul. Some looked with pity, some with suspicion, some with disgust. I stopped trying to explain myself. Instead, I focused on therapy. Dr. Ramos introduced me to trauma group sessions. Walking into that room for the first time was terrifying. 10 strangers, all with haunted eyes. But as I spoke about panic attacks, nightmares, losing trust in family, I realized I wasn't alone. For the first time in months, I didn't feel crazy. I felt understood. By the spring of 2023, something inside me shifted. Instead of just surviving, I wanted to grow. I enrolled in community college. At first, just one class, psychology. I figured if I could understand the mechanics of trauma, maybe I could understand myself. I fell in love with it. Every lecture felt like a key turning in a lock. I learned about how it rewires the brain, how manipulation traps people, how recovery is possible with support. I devoured textbooks, highlighted paragraphs, scribbled notes in margins. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a curse. It felt like a challenge. Mom and I began repairing our relationship slowly. At dinner one evening, over steaming bowls of curry, she reached across the table, her hand trembling. "I am sorry," she whispered. I stared at her, the watch ticking on my wrist. For years, I'd waited to hear those words. "I know," I said quietly, "but we can break this cycle together." Her tears fell into her curry. Mine weren't far behind. By late 2023, Paul's trial began. Sitting in the courtroom was surreal, seeing him in an orange jumpsuit, no longer powerful, no longer untouchable. When he looked at me, I didn't flinch. The prosecutor presented everything: forged documents, Ethan's recordings, evidence of his staged death. When the guilty verdict came, a weight lifted, not entirely, but enough for me to breathe again. Strangers still whispered, but now some whisper differently. "That's the kid who took him down." In 2024, I made the biggest decision of my life. I transferred into a 4-year program to study counseling. I wanted to take the pain Paul caused and forge it into something bigger than me. I wanted to help others who felt trapped, manipulated, broken. Graduation day in May 2028 was surreal. As I walked across the stage, wearing the same watch my father had left me, I thought about the boy who once believed he was nothing without Paul. That boy had been wrong. I wasn't nothing. I was a survivor, a fighter, and now a counsellor. Today, I work with teenagers who feel lost, who are gaslit by family, who suffer panic attacks in silence. When they tell me I feel broken, I show them the scar on my forehead and say, "Me too," but broken doesn't mean finished. The whispers have faded. The online threats have quieted. The debts are gone. But the lessons remain carved into me like stone. Family isn't always safe. Trust can be poisoned. Trauma reshapes you. But healing is possible. And you can rewrite the story you were forced into. As I sit here writing this, the watch ticks steadily on my wrist. My father's memory, my scars, my pain, they're all part of me. But they don't define me. Paul tried to bury me under lies, debts, and threats. Instead, he planted the seed of who I was meant to become. I am Luke. I am 19 no longer. I am a counsellor, a survivor, and proof that even the darkest betrayal can be turned into